Good afternoon, Sean here, Mountains Garage. Last time you saw me, I just finished up rebuilding the 750 Holly, and that was Friday morning. Now it's just about dark on Sunday afternoon. And I've had time in between to hunt through all my stuff, because the whole goal on this ZZ383 is to try to use things that I have laying around. I don't want it to look horrible. I'm not building a rat rod at this point. If I was, it'd be a whole lot more fun. I'm trying to make everything look decent, functional, and not have to buy a whole lot of stuff. So let me show you what I did. Starting in the back, what once was a cell billet single point distributor. Before I got it, somebody put a Petronix unit in it, and it came just as you see it. I had to clean everything, resort the wires. I still have to fix the wiring that somebody chopped off. It only has to go to there, but somebody saw fit to cut it off. But it's hopefully a usable unit. It's electronic. It's nice and small. I had already clearanced the firewall on the Nova for a full-size HEI, and I have plenty of those, but I had this rig and wanted to use it. I didn't really want vacuum advance, but it's there, so I'll try it with and without. Parts are still available for this to change the mechanical curve, and that vacuum is adjustable also, which is cool. The wires are 8mm, high temp, super stock. They actually fit pretty well after I cleaned them up with some Simple Green. That clamp was on it, and I did the old wire tie trick here. I'm going to put boots on it. They're just not here yet. I had to buy those. I had to spend a whole $8 on those on eBay. So this side, I did reclock my starter. So now it just barely clears. So you can see the air gap right there. Plenty of room for plug wires over here. No issues, but I'll put boots on them anyway. The looms were something I had in my shoebox labeled plug wire stuff. They were brand new Jegs. They'll be all right. Actually, with these wires that were pretty long, it kind of made them shorter, if you will. Plenty of clearance here. This side, I had to dent the header to get boot clearance, and this wire has to run around the front. And I chose to clearance the motor mount instead of denting the same pipe I would have had to dent on the other side to clear the wire. I just took a second with the grinder and just took some of that lip off the motor mount. It's handy having a Nova right over my head. This is the part of the throttle linkage. This is the gas pedal mount. You can still buy the mechanical one, which would have an arm sticking up and a mechanical rod to the carburetor. And I prefer that. However, if I'm going to do a lot of engine swapping, for instance, something that has a throttle body, I'm going to need a cable. So I'd be putting one of these back in. So no sense of changing it. The path for a mechanical rod, a little bit obstructed, but would have cleared. However, I had this cable. It came with a couple carburetors I bought this summer. Actually came with all the stuff I got. And I like it better than the factory throttle bracket because it has that adjustable screw to keep it from turning. The factory one can flop around. If you stomp it a lot, it comes forward and you don't have enough throw in your throttle to even get all the way open. It just barely clears my coil, which is cool. And it's a simple hookup to the firewall. I dug through everything I had, hoping to find enough stuff to hook the fresh air intake for the PCV into the air cleaner, but I gave up for now. So I put the PCV on this side, a short hook up into the fitting I put in the manifold. I don't love this breather. It looks like the 80s disco era, but it's a nice breather. It's billet. It unscrews. It has foam filters you can clean. It only would push oil out under full throttle when the PCV system isn't working. The rest of the time it's just sucking in air and won't oil the valve cover down, and the engine should be pretty tight, so we'll see. I may still come up with enough stuff to hook the tube into the air cleaner, so this is sucking fresh air from the air cleaner. A better idea. You can run just a couple open breathers, but if you've ever pulled the valve cover off an engine that never came up to temperature, pretty much every time you start it cold and bring it up to temperature, there's white milky stuff in the oil. It's moisture. The PCV system helps remove that. It's not necessarily a smog thing. It's actually functional. Open vents. You see that a lot on stock cars, drag cars. Pretty much everybody runs a vacuum pump. And that solves all your problems. The engine never leaks because you're sucking the vacuum all the time. You do pull oil into a canister. So a lot of the turbo LS stuff you see people run just a hose from each valve cover to a puke tank. And that's great, but you're still not getting rid of all that moisture. My oil pressure sender for the idiot light I stole off the 307 before I get rid of it. Knowing whatever I put in here, I'd still be putting it back in. Yes, I said idiot light. Same with the water temp. That's also for an idiot light. It belongs over here in the cylinder head, but the threaded hole isn't big enough. So I'll have to run it over here and extend my wire around. That plug and that plug are temporary because I'm going to test run the engine. I just bought a stock 70 Nova water pump because it has a through hole instead of threaded for the power steering pump that I already scienced out when I got the 307 running. I actually had to make a bracket that I couldn't find that goes over here. Despite all the brackets I have laying around, I didn't have that one, so I made it. And the pulleys, that's that rusty one I showed you. The top one didn't look bad until I went to wipe it off. Before I painted it, I wiped all the paint off, so I had to sandblast that one completely too. The spacer and fan I had, it's got good clearance. The alternator actually belongs in a forklift or a Kubota tractor. It's called the Mini Denso. You see them everywhere. It's converted to one wire. The bracket I had bought a while ago. I'm not that thrilled with it. It's super rugged, but I had to make spaces to make the push straight because they don't know what you're going to run for an alternator. But this would probably be the same. It runs on an angle the way it comes in a kit, so I made a spacer there. And of course, running this tiny alternator, I had to make a spacer here. The first belt I grabbed out of my belt pile was the correct length, which was kind of fun. Plus, I have a spare. That's pretty rare. The last LS swap I did in a 72 Nova, I figured out how to take the wire that originally hooked to the alternator that shuts off the gen light on the dash, and you have to go over when I remove the regulator off the radiator support and jump one wire there. Long story short, I should be able to make that shut off as well using this one wire alternator because there are a couple connections in the back right there. One of those I can use for my lamp. So it only puts out 40 amps, which doesn't sound like much, but the factory Nova externally regulated alternator was 37. And they did have a 61 amp, the big one, if you had lots of extra stuff. This car did have air conditioning. It might have had the big one. It's long gone, and I'm not a big fan of the externally regulated alternator. Even though I have a couple of them and could have run it successfully and still might. You never know. This thing flames out, it doesn't work. I'll probably be grabbing something I already have. For fuel delivery, this is just a stock O'Reilly Auto Parts pump, and from the dyno testing I've read and saw, it'll support 450 to 500 horse before it's not enough. So in this case, it's going to be okay. If I was actually racing it and still running the mechanical pump, I'd have to get something better. It's a pet peeve of mine that there isn't an affordable, in fact there's only pretty much one that I've found, 3/8 tube. This would have been 3/8 tube, or 3/8 inverted flare brake line, up to the carburetor. You're all familiar with that on a GM, old GM. But an inline filter that has 3/8 tube female on both ends, or any combination thereof, without a return port, pretty much doesn't exist. You can buy, they did use one in a Corvette, I think, without the return port. They get like $70 for them. It's a GF, I forget the number, AC Delco. So I'm not going to do that. So I went from 3/8 tube to -6 right off the pump. And a funny story, I dug through all my old stuff because I wanted it at least to match. And all my red and blue stuff, I couldn't find anything I was happy with. This one actually has red and blue on one end and black on the other. I went through all my black stuff. I actually stole some of the black stuff to finish. But I would have had to take all these apart and redo them because I don't trust anybody's. You know, these are hard to do. So I would have taken them apart, make sure the line was still good. I don't know how old the line is. So this would have been questionable. I mean, I save it because it's probably still good. And I took out the push lock box, which is all black. I had enough fittings. Combined with the filter and a couple fittings I had in black. And I was able to plumb up a fuel system. So there's a small Russell filter in line. I wouldn't have run the gauge, but it was on the T that I needed to make all this work. And the 6 double female close connect. I guess I'll know what my fuel pressure is. And some weird 45s to get around there. It's not ideal, but I used what I had. And again, this actually came with this carburetor. With those black lines I just showed you over there. And like I say, not ideal, but it's what I had. And my goal was to get this thing ready to run. A couple years ago, when I was going to get the mill, I found this cart. The guy said he had a Bridgeport on it. It's super heavy duty. So I brought it home. And this thing made it bend. So I was going to leave it on there so I could move it around. Now it still lives on the pallet. So my next use of it was going to be to build an engine run test stand. It's kind of gommy. It's really low to the ground. It would have been hard to load the engine off and on it, even if I built one, getting the feet of the engine crane underneath a box that you build for an engine run test stand. I've borrowed a few engine run test stands. Unless you have an overhead crane, it's not real fun to mount the engine in it. And plus the bandsaw has found a home on this permanently, so I can still move it around. So I come up with a better idea one day. I have a whole bunch of headers I want to test fit on a Nova chassis with both the small block frame mounts and the big block frame mounts. Small block, big block, and LS, and then build an LS turbo setup for that. And this is easy enough to work on, so it wouldn't be a problem. I could have used this for a test run stand, but I had another option. I've been collecting Nova clips for years. Why not just wheel one in? Literally, I rolled this in, haven't even cleaned it. I have a set of small block frame stands, and the 72 has a set of big block frame stands if I want to borrow them to try mounting stuff in there. So I'll put the small block frame stands on here. And I have lots of caster wheels, so I'll probably bolt some caster wheels on the back. I won't do any permanent mods to this frame. And I have a steering box. I stole the steering box or gave it away, I think. But I have another one. In fact, I put a power steering box on just to make sure I got plenty of clearance. In fact, there's one right there with bolts. And this will allow me to easily try all kinds of... I'm not even sure the stainless headers that are on the 383 are even going to clear a Nova clip, so we're going to find out here shortly if they will. I can't tell you how many times, even in a week, I answer what transmission lengths are the same and what interchanges easily in a GM, old GM. But with this crossmember, a 3-speed manual, a 4-speed manual, a power glide, and a short shaft 6-inch TH350 they're all the same length, they all have the same mount position, they all take the same drive shaft, they all take the same yoke with the exception of the T10 4-speed. So I'll bolt that crossmember in there, and I have a power glide case right there. I also have a Turbo 400 case if I need to, but the power glide, in this case, will bolt right in without doing anything special, just to hold the back of the engine up while I test run it. In the box on the left is a brand new radiator support for the 72. But next to it is the somewhat rusty core support out of the same car. I'll just use that. I may even bob it off if it's in the way, just to mount the radiator. That way I can make up hoses and pretty much simulate bolting it in the car without having to bolt it in the car. You get it. I have several Nova radiators that'll bolt right in. I actually have the top piece that holds the radiator in. I just tripped over that the other day. So this isn't going to be a difficult project. I won't have any dedicated starting panel or gauges. I'll just hook my snap-on oil pressure gauge to the port. I'll use happens to be snap-on. I don't want to sound like a tool snob, but I do have some good tools. Most of mine aren't, so I should brag, I guess. I'll just hook my starter button up over here, stick a line in the fuel jug, and it should be able to make smoke. The 71 originally had this engine, the 307. It's kind of funny. I'm going to leave that right there. Why not? Not trying to fool anybody, but it's already stuck to this beautiful air cleaner. And this is totally out of place. But my first car, the 70 Chevelle SS396, had the real decal on the passenger valve cover in the same spot on the 396 402. And I always thought it was cool. And then when I went on the honeymoon, we flew to Buffalo, we're driving to Niagara Falls, and I drove right past the Tonawanda engine plant. They'd already long stopped making, I think they were just finishing up making the 8.1. But, kind of cool. That's where all the big blocks came to life. Has nothing to do with this engine, but the valve cover was really plain, and I had that in my pile of decals, and it makes me happy when I look at it. So Novas didn't really have any factory instrumentation unless you had the optional console with some gauges. You have idiot lights on the dash. And that's what the senders I have installed are going to hook to. So I'm going to have idiot lights. I like the looks of the custom dashes where you put aftermarket gauges in place of the stock speedometer. Or you can make one, you can buy one. It's kind of an expensive route to go. You're going to spend $400 or $500 doing the whole project. Drag racing, I had gauges, and I also had idiot lights. The only thing I relied on was the idiot light. I mean, I'm going to test the oil pressure in this engine when I test run it. You can hear, if you're in tune with your vehicle, whether you have oil pressure or not. And to have an idiot light. When I was drag racing, you don't have time to look at a gauge. I had a big red light in my face that would have come on if something went wrong. But you have no time for that. It is probably coolant temperature is more important to know. Again, this is only going to come on when it gets hot, but for what I'm doing, I'm going to go without gauges until further notice. I've never been a big fan of the classic 3-gauge trio sticking under the dash. I'd rather not have them. Personal preference, I guess. All right, now we're up to date. Follow along because I'm going to start it and I'm going to record the whole thing. We'll see if she starts right up. No reason why it shouldn't. I don't know the history of the short block. I didn't even pull a rod cap or a main cap. I didn't see the need to. It all looked good, felt good. Didn't hear any noises as I was turning it by hand. And it certainly, with the plugs in, makes a lot of compression. Because it's somewhat difficult to roll over when it's making air. So follow along, like and subscribe, all that jazz. We're coming up on a year's worth of videos. It's just fun at this point. I've gotten it down so it's not such a burden. And thanks for following along. I'll talk to you next time.